Please welcome Chief Customer Information Officer at Ping Identity, Richard Bird.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let's make sure everyone's awake. I lovingly call this particular slot the hangover time slot for the conference. I am proud to say that I have owned this slot now for 3 consecutive years. Thank you. The best part of this is my conversation with Andy Hindle and the Identiverse team about 6 weeks ago. Transitioned from, hey, we know you have the slot. We know that people like to hear you speak, which I think is funny. And he said, but this year we'd like you to do it in 15 minutes. I said, well, sure, why not? Let's make it harder when people are trying to, recover from last night's festivities. So just briefly before I get started, the bow tie is back. There we go. Those of you that have seen me speak, I actually have 2 personas that I speak in. About 50% of the time, it'll be the bow tie, and about 50% of the time, it's a black t-shirt, engineer boots, and a lot of tattoos. My life is really, really weird now. I've been doing this for about 3 or 4 years. Can't count the number of times that I've spoken, and I get people that call me and say, hey, we'd like you to come speak, but we'd like the guy with the tattoos, because the guy with the bow tie, we're kind of not digging his stuff. Like I'm twins, right? And it's really kind of funny because I realize I need to come up with a 3rd persona. So next year I think it's either going to be a lumberjack or Batman. It's just so I can give some diversity out to the consumer population and give them what they really, really want. I'm going to dispense, because I have 15 minutes, I'm going to dispense with any kind of bio of myself. It's out there. Many of you have seen me speak before. The big difference for me this year is being the Chief Customer Information Officer for Ping Identity. And I'm really, really excited because the uniqueness of my career has given me the opportunity to be in corporate sector for 20 plus years, to be in consulting multiple times in my career, now to be on the solution side. And to be able to span across that diversity of experiences has really given me the opportunity to do something many of us do not get to do in this particular practice and trade, which is I get to go to hundreds of companies. I get to see identity in every kind of flavor. I get to go to different countries and work with governments around things like open banking accords and data privacy. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So we dive right into it. Digital identity for the people. What does it mean? What does it mean for people to own, manage, participate in a digital economy or a digital workplace or a digital universe, and what kind of consequences does that have relative to identity? We talk about this in everything from master classes, deep dive sessions at the technical level, but we really don't talk about it in terms of its association to data protection. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about data protection regulations. First thing I want to remind everybody of is you need to understand in this world where we've got compliance pressures relative to data protection laws and all other compliance standards are reactionary, right? Consumer protection, we go back in the day, consumer protection didn't start with the digital era, right? It started with things like seat belts and motorcycle helmets and all that kind of stuff, ANSI standards, and it happened because people got killed, people got hurt, people made bad decisions in making products that injured people, and regulations came about as a result of those bad things happening. There's not innovation happening as a result of it. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, what I'd really like to be when I grow up is a regulator. Right? Nobody goes, I really want to push the industry forward in my given, sector by being in Congress and making rules to force people to follow. Right? That is not how it works. Right? So data protection itself is a response. Real important when we look at the EU Commission. The EU Commission, relative to GDPR, its opening statement is making a transparent marketplace for the citizens of the EU. One of the pieces of this is GDPR, and it's to protect citizens of the EU. The CCPA, and again, history repeats itself. CCPA is GDPR light. I don't know, a couple years ago, anyone remember NYDFS? Is GDPR light, right? Everything is kind of going towards a GDPR-like construct, whether you are bound by GDPR or not, particularly in the case of CCPA. But they state it's to provide a private right of action in connection with certain unauthorized access to your information as a citizen. But what do the results say? Data protection privacy rules are not new. They have been in place for about 2 or 3 decades at a minimum. And how are they working? Well, last year, we had 500 million unique identity records that were stolen. This is from the Identity Theft Resource Center. Great resource if you're looking for information necessary for business cases and those types of things. 500 million in 2018. Hershkovec Group. A lot of news on this recently as they've been picked up. Hershkovec Group, their analysis group, is suggesting that we're going to see $6 trillion in losses, cybersecurity losses, by 2021. That's up from $3 trillion, which is basically like saying you would have been better off investing all your money in paying somebody to hack than put your money in the stock market, right? That's the kind of performance that we're talking about, exponential growth in losses. Just in May alone, again, ITRC, 110 required reported breaches with 588,000 sensitive records stolen in the US. So we're killing it with data protection regulations, aren't we? I mean, performance, if you had this type of performance based on policy standards and operations within your organizations, how long would you have your jobs if you had woke up in the morning as a kid and said, I want to be a regulator, right? The regulators are not succeeding. What's the missing link? Man, 15 minutes is a lot shorter than I thought. What's the missing link? So we talked about the digital self. One of the things that's difficult when we get into these conversations is we need to understand in the universe of things that we control, we care about the passing of, through the fabric, that mystical fabric of the analog person, the human being, the real you, into the digital you. And we care about that from a temporal standpoint. We care about it from the time you log in till the time you log out, right? That's when we're trying to protect you and your stuff. But what's missing is there's no mandate to protect the you. There are no compliance demands around identity standards. There are no compliance demands around what you need to do to keep a customer safe. All of those compliance demands are around the stuff. So when we take a look at it, let's just take the pathway, the digital self. I am going to go ahead and access by way of account and password, by 2FA, MFA. It doesn't really matter. It's a method, right, for me to log in. And when I log in, insert authentication magic here. Boom. I log in. There's my stuff. The regulators say, protect the stuff, the ducats, the treasures, the divas, the Benjamins. Protect all that stuff. Except there's no protection of me. So all the regulations are loaded there. And when we turn around and look at what's happening in session, pretty much nothing, right? You may have some rules, engines relative to, privileged escalation, de-escalation, those types of things. Onerous, difficult to manage, and many people trying the rules-based approach. It's just hard. So we don't do much in the space and duration of when you're accessing your stuff. And when I log out, I raised this in a webinar the other day. I was like, and pretty much nobody ever checks and authenticates whether you logged out. And somebody got really, really touchy about it, technical guy. He said, tell me what the risk is of somebody not logging out. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, when you go to Nordstrom's, does the security guard check at night to make sure nobody's hiding in the bathroom? Logging out is an event in itself that is worthy of some form of authentication, and nobody does it. What does that mean? That means we're protecting all the data and the stuff, and in that interim period where absolutely nothing is happening because there's no mandate, there's no requirement, no obligations, no regulations, nothing, it means that I can pretty much be anyone other than you and take your stuff, right? This is problematic in the corporate setting because I got to tell you, if I did forensics after I got breached because I was going to get nailed with some type of regulatory fine regardless of the regime, I really don't care what country, I really don't care what state, I would immediately go do a forensic and I would say, I can prove that the reason that this data got stolen that I was protecting is because the user screwed up. And I don't have an obligation to protect the user, so I don't owe the fine. And I think that there's a case to be made that under test in courts, there might be an argument there. Right, but let's talk about it just a little bit more detail because data protection without identity coupling is dead on arrival. So we talk about regulations. Are they effective? I don't know. This is what regulators expect. Boom. tensile strength, thread count. We're going to dictate to you what the shirt should look like, and that's what they want my organization to look like. I've been a CISO, I've been a CIO. That shirt, I wasn't given budget for to buy last year. I'm not able to do anything that looks like that shirt, so I got to use what I have, and I end up looking like this. Right? Regulators, I'm going to give you the gold standard. We're going to create an Olympic level experience for your customers and our citizens. We're going to put all of the guardrails in place for you to be successful. Man, it's going to look like this. And I will tell you what, my information security organization looked a whole lot like this. Matter of fact, I like to point out that the kid that's second in there, that's my vendor management organization. It's absolutely making it impossible for me to close a deal, right? I got to hurdle over them in order to be able to get the solution in place that I need. The simple yet inescapable truth is, protecting humans means that we actually have to protect humans, right? Protecting data yields nothing. Protecting data yields a lot of protected data and escalating consequences for cybersecurity. This is not my opinion, right? And my opinion is up for debate, but this particular piece is not my opinion. This is data. This is history. In order to change the shape of a curve, there must be a catastrophic element of change. Nothing is changing catastrophically in our organizations or in our communities or in our government, except for the introduction of the notion that identity is the core of security. That's the big change that we're all struggling with in the last 2 years. So if we don't recognize the need to protect identities, it means that we cannot create a digital world, a digital identity for the people as a driving force of security and thinking and regulations. Cyber losses will continue to escalate. Data privacy laws will continue to fail. And ultimately, when we think about the need for authentication for government services, healthcare, insurance, we stand the risk of marginalizing 1 billion people who will not have the capacity to authenticate themselves and their identity as being who they say they are. Because they will not have access to systems, they will not have access to networks, they will not have access to resources to be able to establish themselves in the digital economy. That is scary. I'd like to spend another 45 minutes talking about the notion of something we've never talked about in our communities, which is we have ethical obligations as practitioners to take into account that we could actively disenfranchise 1 billion people in this world by our decisions that we make today. Right? But can't we just teach people to be safer? Well, I'll go through this quickly because the clock is really winding down fast. So why can't we just teach humans to be safer and do better at personal security management? I'm going to be really, really blunt here. I know I'm not known for that. It is because human beings suck at personal security and risk management behaviors. How bad do they suck? Again, this is not my opinion. This is math. This is science. This is psychology. Hey, Dave, don't click that link. Cybersecurity awareness training. 20% of Americans to this day do not lock their doors. They account for 63% of all insurance burglary losses in the United States of America. Does anyone need cybersecurity awareness training to say that locking your doors is safer than keeping your doors unlocked? But 20% of Americans don't. 13% of Americans still don't wear a seatbelt. They account for 47% of crash fatalities. The problems with percentages is sometimes we forget what that equates to in raw numbers. If 1 out of every 9.5 people would buckle their seatbelt, half as many people would die a year. That is a big, big number. And humans still won't do it because they suck at security and risk management on a personal level. By the way, these are the same people that you are depending upon to do the right things in your digital space. Same people, right? People still smoke. 90% of all cancer is linked to smoking. One of my most favorite ones is almost all fall deaths in national parks in the last several years have been a result of people taking selfies next to signs that clearly say, "Stay away from the edge." These are our people. These are our humans. Securing the digital self. I'm going to leave off here. About a minute to go, and I have a great opportunity to make an introduction for our next speaker. But look, this is about trust and credibility. And forget about this in the context of things like zero trust. We need to establish a trust system, and that trust system can be customers, citizens, employees, fans. The dynamic is all the same. And in this triangle, it is not an accident last week that Apple came out and said, if you use our SSO, you'll have more privacy and be more secure. Take that into consideration. Throw the regulations out. What happens if your competitors say, you do business with us and you will be safer? We are in a space now where customers are considering that, and if it becomes a competitive imperative, are you ready for it? Because if you're not, the way that things are structured today, identity protection does not equal data protection. And the only way that we can change that is to recognize that the pieces that we've talked about for years, going back to the old days of least privileged access and so on and so forth, are just pieces to solve use cases, right? So it's least privileged, it's MFA, it's passwordless, it's zero trust, it's blockchain. They all have a role to play. One is not superior to the other. But we are finally in a place where our voices are being heard and we can make a difference. And it is time for us to consider the implications of creating a world where digital identity exists for the people